Welcome to Central Valley Writers Workshop. Our great valley is home to many writers and authors, all of whom are looking for tips, tools, and techniques in order to improve their writing skills. Our hope is that you will get all of that and more here on our show as we interview writers and experts. I'm your host, Claudia Newcorn, author of the award-winning fantasy fiction series, The Chrysalis Chronicles of Fairy, freelance editor and writer, and Modesto Bee community columnist. Today, as our special guest, we have with us Major Mitchell. Major is a prolific writer. He has over 9 books to his credit and counting, with a focus on historical westerns. 2 of his books are Poverty Flat and McCulney Gold, and he is also the head of Shalico Press, so he knows the industry not only from the perspective of an author, but also as a publisher. Major, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Well, thank you for inviting me, Claudia.
More than welcome. Would you be kind enough to tell us a bit about your background and how you got into writing?
I think I've always made up stories ever since I can remember. I was always daydreaming and making up things in my head. My biggest complaint my teachers had to my mother was that I daydream all the time. And I used to think, well, heck yeah, what was going on inside of my head was a lot more interesting than what was in the classroom. As a young kid, I used to make my own comic books with stick figures. I'm a lousy artist, but I would make up these elaborate stories. But my first serious book I wrote as a Christmas present for my wife. And this was some years back. It was a little Western I titled Manhunter. Mm-hmm. It was about a half-breed Comanche Indian. And I came home from work one day and she had the manuscript in her lap. I had given it in a box to her, all wrapped up. And I said, well, how did you like it? And she sniffed and said, I loved it. And then she handed me the manuscript and says, but it's too short, make it longer. And
wow.
That's my wife. She is my editor. She didn't realize that being married to me meant love and cherish and edit everything he writes. And
check the fine print of the wedding vows.
But she's a very good editor, and she's edited several other authors' books besides mine. That book, Manhunter, was supposed to have been published by Commonwealth out of Canada. Mm-hmm. And they had the galley proofs done and were working on the cover art when the manager hadn't been paying a lot of bills and the court locked the doors. Oh. And it took about 2 years to get the rights back. And then by then I had written The Donia, mm-hmm. which has been a very successful book. And I just this last year pulled that manuscript about Manhunter off the shelf, rewrote it, and I'm glad it didn't get published back then because it's a much better book now.
Serendipity in your favor.
Yeah.
Why historical westerns? What attracted you to that genre, and why do you write in it?
I've always been a history buff, and I guess some of my genes got into my son Mark. He's extremely good at history. But I grew up in the Imperial Valley, and my dad had managed a cattle ranch at one time. Mm-hmm. We grew up around rodeo, cattle, cowboys, and I've always loved it. And of course, you went to the movies back then, it was either John Wayne, Roy Rogers, or Gene Autry, somebody like that. And so I kind of combined the two over a period of time. I just love history and studying. I have a collection of encyclopedias published way back in the 20s and 30s. Oh, and when I write a book, I go to the oldest newspaper articles, interview people, dig up the oldest information available, so that what I say in the book actually fits very well mm-hmm. with a story.
Now, if you come up for an idea for a story, do you first do a lot of research, since you are doing historical writing, to create a framework for the book, or how do you go about doing that?
It's a combination. The first thing I do is usually get an outline, make a little outline of where I want this book to start, mm-hmm. where I want it to end up at. And then all the stuff in between is just how it happened. And then after I get the outline, then I start digging for information. And on the Donia, I think I spent 2 years because there is a lot, read just in the research,
Wow.
because there's a lot of information on it about the gold rush, about what the original Spanish land grants consisted of. Very few people realize that the average land grant was 75 square miles.
That huge?
That huge, and
Didn't know that.
some people have multiple land grants. But the Doña Leonida, I only gave her one 75 square mile. I mean, 75 square miles is a lot of land, and but they lived very quaint. The average, if you took in account that the average landowner, if you said he could read and write his own name, if you said he was educated because he could read and write his own name, less than 100 of them would be called educated. Most of them could not read or write their own name, and that's why they were so easily taken advantage of.
When you think about that history, you mentioned the Doña, and I know you've also written Poverty Flats, among several others. What are your sources of inspiration for your book? Because you're anchoring off of history, but what inspired you to write those books and some of your others?
It's differs. The Doña was actually my brother Jerry's idea, and he kept telling me the story he had in his mind, and he knew that I had written Manhunter, the original one. And I said, well, write it. And he says, oh, you're a much better writer. And this went on for a couple of years. And so one Sunday afternoon after church, I went to his house and I took a legal pad and I said, okay, let's outline the story. And I ate lunch with him and we made up the story. And I said, do you want to write part of it? And he says, no, you write it. So when I finished and I handed him a 409-page manuscript, he says, my God, I was thinking 100 pages or so. I said, well, you shouldn't have given it to me. But the book actually is more than that because it's double-spaced manuscript, and so it's probably closer to 1,000 pages. The book itself is 409 pages, and then in the back of it there is a bunch of authors' notes on my research to tell the history behind the book. Since then, he and I got together, and you'll notice his name on this one, Dusty Boots. We co-wrote it together. And there's a sequel to Dusty Boots that we co-wrote called Joker's Play that is out as an ebook and will go to print very shortly. And we're working on another sequel to that one. So we're turning Dusty Boots into a series. But some of the others I got the inspiration for a reason to believe just from rodeo, about a girl in Oakdale who rides a rodeo circuit. When I finished this one, I had to tell my wife, says, my Lord, I wrote a chick book. It's a romance.
Chicklet, yes.
Yeah. Poverty Flat, the name just to intrigue me. You go down I-5 between Gustine and Newman, you'll see a bridge says Poverty Flat Road Undercrossing, and it always struck me as there's got to be a story there, and I'm a member of the Gustine Historical Society, so they helped me research it. But honestly, it's just 1,000 acres of grassland that they graze cattle on, no water.
Okay.
And so most of the novel takes place in Hills Ferry, which doesn't exist anymore. But that book is done extremely well too.
Well, now, when you speak with people, I know you're often a guest speaker, there's writers who want to understand what are the characteristics of historical fiction. As a writer, what guidance would you give to people aspiring to write in your genre? Are there particular characteristics or expectations people have when they pick up that type of book? I would
pass on a piece of information that Louis L'Amour gave in a book once on writing. He said every good writer has to be a reader. So I would pick up some books in that genre that have done well and read it, and you'll see what needs to be in there. But mainly, don't rely on current history. I mean, go back to the earliest you can find to find out what it was really like. interview elderly people. When I was writing the Doña, I ran across several people whose family had known Joaquin Murrieta and knew what he was really like. And in fact, one of the girls I interviewed, her great uncle was a member of Joaquin's band, and he was the member that was hung at McCollum Hill. He was captured and hung for wrestling. But Hollywood will not tell you what the ranchos are like or what Joaquin was really like or any of those things. To get that flavor, you have to go to the earliest documents you can find. Like, for instance, what they ate on the ranchos was basically beef. That's what they had.
Mm-hmm.
It was beneath the dignity of a vaquero to get off his horse and plant a garden.
Okay.
They descended from the old Mexican and Spanish soldiers, and if you couldn't do it on horseback, it wasn't worth doing. So a lot of the landowners, unless they had some Indians that had been taught how to farm by the priest before the missions were closed, they ate beef. They ate it in the morning, for lunch, and for dinner, and that's what they ate. And scurvy was rampant amongst some of the young children because there was no vegetables or citrus or anything like that.
It's amazing listening to the texture that you bring to your story. You're not just telling a story, you're giving it a rootstock, so it also is an educational piece as well. I mean, that sounds like a very important part of the type of writing that you're doing. You had mentioned when we were talking before that you like to look at writing with opposites. And I thought that was a very interesting technique that you use. Can you talk a bit about what you mean there and why it works for you?
In this book, Canyon Wind,
Mm-hmm.
the girl is it's about a widow who's a rancher in South Dakota. She owns a ranch. Her daughter has come up missing in the children's blizzard, which was an actual type of thing that happened. She has 4 boys. She's trying to take care of, straight businesswoman. But she hires this guy who wanders through looking for work, and there's different personalities all through the book. She doesn't know it at the time, but he's an ex-lawman, and the first time they catch somebody who's stolen some cattle, he's going to string him up at the nearest cottonwood. Well, no, she wants him to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that type of thing going on throughout the book. In the Doña, you have this, I made Doña Leonida educated for the sake of the novel, although in the back of the book, the notes, I talk about education. She's strict Catholic. She's a widow. There's the proper, and because she's upper class, there's certain protocols she must do in the period of mourning. During this book, a young Irish doctor winds up on her property, and he's basically trying to take care of the kids there, and he had to get out of town because of trouble in the town.
Mm-hmm.
And well, he doesn't understand a lot of the stuff going on with her, and she can't understand him, but there is an attraction to them. And so that's what I mean by opposites. If you're going to write about a romance about a girl, for heaven's sakes, make her guy a little different. I mean, like real life, because and then when you put them together and throw a problem into the mix,
Mm-hmm.
he's going to want to handle it this way, she's going to want to handle it this way, and so on and so forth.
And we'll be back with Major Mitchell.
Orient House, family owned and operated since 1983, offers an extensive menu of Chinese and Japanese cuisine. Voted Best Asian Restaurant by Modesto Bee readers with 2 locations, 609 Tully Road across from MJC and 3318 McHenry Avenue across from Target. Be sure to try the daily lunch specials featuring garlic chicken or tempura. That's Orient House, great for dine-in or take-out.
And we're back with Major Mitchell, author of Historical Westerns. Now, listening to you, I mean, you're very enjoyable because you keep me wondering what you're going to say next. How do you keep people turning the pages on your book? Do you have any special methods in crafting the chapters, or having them say, I want to keep seeing what happens? Because you've read a book which gets kind of saggy in the middle and people aren't interested. What do you do to prevent that from happening?
Try to end each chapter with a hook. Think of the old serials, the theater. I mean, they were hokey and everything, but those guys who made them were very crafty in that you had to go back next week and buy another ticket into the theater to find out what happened to Joe or whatever, whoever it was. Like for instance, I won't turn there, but this is from the end of one of the chapters in the book. She bolted toward the center of the room only to freeze again. There was a second man she hadn't seen standing in the shadows, and who slowly pulled a large knife from his belt as she backed toward the wall. Feisty little bitch, aren't you? He cautioned. He took a cautious step toward her as she slid along the wall, feeling for something to fight with. This is going to hurt real bad. Leonida let out an ear-splitting scream as he raised a knife. That's the end of the chapter.
Okay. Cliffhangers.
Yes. And if you end them in that way, they don't have to be that dramatic. But if you end, I mean, think of you as a reader. If you're writing it, think of you as a reader. What would make you want to turn the page? What would make you want to read the book in the first place? First line in the Doña was, it was about 10 o'clock in the morning when he decided to kill him. That was the first line. So from there, I mean, that's the story. He's going to kill somebody. The rest, the 400 pages later, is just telling you what went on and what ended. But you find out something right off the bat.
So you bait the hook, you set the hook, and you keep the hook in all the way to the end.
I try to.
Well, now, with all of the writing you've done, obviously you've got tremendous experience. What are some of the challenges you've had to overcome as a writer?
My biggest challenge is promoting the books. I hate that part. If I could sit behind a computer for 6 or 8 hours, sit there at the keyboard and write, I'd have a great day. Actually talking like with you, this is fun. But getting out there and trying to promote a book, to me, I've always been taught from the time I was a little kid, and I think I just hit the microphone there.
They'll forgive you.
Don't brag. So I've always tried to be back. But if you're promoting something, you become a salesman, so you are, and you're not promoting so much your book, but you're promoting yourself as a writer. And a lot of people forget that. If you go to the bookstore, you don't go to the you don't look for a book by the title. You go there looking for Tom Clancy, Lewis L'Amour, or James Patterson.
Very true.
You're looking for the writer, and so that's what you're trying to promote. So if I'm meeting with a group of people and talking with them, I'm talking about Major Mitchell as an expert in something, and that's always seemed a little backwards the way I was raised as a Christian.
Well, yeah, in this case you have to brag, but it's legitimate bragging, if you'd like to call it that. And if you're not promoting yourself, then nobody's going to know about you. I had read somewhere that 700,000 books are published in 2011. So if you're not beating the drum, nobody's going to know that you're actually out there. Again, with 9 books, obviously you mentioned how when you saw Manhunter, you were so glad that it hadn't been published and you rewrote it. How has your writing changed and evolved over time?
I think it has become more real. I wrote a sequel to The Manhunter that hasn't gone to print, or The Manhunter is available as an ebook, as most of these are ebooks. When I got done with the manuscript and my wife got done editing it, I got the biggest compliment from her I think I've ever gotten, and she says, I think I know these people, this family, I know them. In other words, they were real. And if I can get you, I've actually had a lot of people come up to me, and not just one or two, but a bunch of them wanting to know where they can find out historical information about Doña Leonida. She's fictional. but they believe she's real because I made the scene so real with the historical value behind it. And when you create somebody, you make them about as real as you can. And I think that is what I've improved on. If you, like from the original version of Manhunter to what it is now, there's a vast difference because they have become real. Instead of one-dimensional characters or whatever, you see the real person, how they act, how they feel. And I try not to tell the reader what to think or what's happening, but I try to show them. There's a difference in it.
So in the story, the characters you're creating isn't by just giving a paragraph, but through their actions, how they comport themselves. It sounds like you create a tremendous depth of character, but you're doing it through the story. As you say, you're showing, but you're telling and showing at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, you can have a girl flirt with a guy without her actually saying a word.
Very true.
And the same with a guy. I mean, if a man, if a lady is slightly coming on to him, maybe through eye contact or whatever, he's going to respond to it. I mean, whether anything happens or not, he's going to be flattered. And guys will say, no, they don't. Bull, I'm a guy. I mean, I know. And sometimes we can be dumb as a brick. One time I had my wife say something about a girl flirting with me, and I said, what are you talking about? She said, oh, come on, you didn't notice that. She even touched your sleeve. Well, I come looking back at it, well, she's right. But my mind was a gazillion miles away.
Those receptors were not on.
That's right, they were turned off. Lucky for me.
But your wife noticed.
Oh, yes, she did.
Why did you decide to become a publisher as well? Because most authors are at the whims of a publisher. Why did you decide to go to that extra step and launch that publishing company?
I had dealt with 4 publishers, and I found one of them I was very pleased with. In fact, one of my children's books, The Witch on Oak Street, is still published by them. I've never changed that one. It's still sitting with them. But most of them I had trouble with, and one of them actually went out of business in this economy. 4 Seasons no longer exist. They were the original publishers of the Donia. But I have a friend in San Jose who's a member of the Western Writers of America, and she has her own publishing company, and she started it mainly to get books out on time for some centennial or something going on. And she said, well, why don't you start your own company? And I said, well, yeah, Pat, sure. And she says, it's not magic. And she gave me a few hints, and I started looking at it. And I started Shalico Press mainly to do my own work. Then I kept having people come up to me and ask if I would publish their book. And since I have the capability of doing soft cover, hardcover, multiple sizes, and full color, as a lot of children's authors have come to me because to get a full color 8.5 by 11 with brilliant colors for a children's book is very difficult and expensive.
Yes.
And so that's how I got into it.
Is it something you would recommend to other authors to pursue? Or, again, you have so many books, and as you say, others have approached you, there seems to be a fit there. But is it a strategy you would recommend other authors consider doing? Is it very difficult?
I would recommend that they think about it and ask a lot of questions because there's so much involved in it. And especially if you start working with other authors. There's so much involved in it, and there's a lot of hidden expense. The first few books I published was people for somebody else. I thought I had all the bases covered. I did not. I wound up with a lot of money coming out of my pocket. And then you got to sit down every month and figure out royalties to pay people. I wouldn't say don't do it. I would say research every little in and out first on it, and to get things into distribution with Baker and Taylor and Ingram and The bookstore still won't touch the book unless it's listed as returnable, and when all of a sudden you get 30 copies of Jones' book returned to you, and you say, wow, because you have bought them, you pay the printer, and you pay the distribution on it, and you have these books, so what do you do with them? So there's a lot of things to think about.
Well, I was really surprised when I learned that bookstores are actually consignments, where, and I've run into what you're saying, if there's not a return policy, most bookstores won't touch you. They don't want to be saddled with the inventory if they're unable to move it. And I think that's been a shock for a lot of authors. I believe a lot of the publishing houses charge quite a hefty fee where they'll maintain a return policy. And I think that also makes it challenging for authors. So that you're offering that, I think, is very, very important for your clients.
Well, what they do, they figure they want to make X amount of dollars on a book, so they're going to charge that up front. So in your book, whether you sell 1 copy or 1,000,000 copies, it makes them very little difference. The 1,000,000 copies they'd be happy about,
Yeah.
but 1 copy, who cares? I've already got my money out of you.
As we're wrapping up, I was hoping you could share some additional advice and insights for our viewers. If you were counseling a group of writers, what would be some of the most important things you would like to leave behind with them as advice to help them become better writers?
Write about life. Make your people human. I mean, the same things that motivated Cain to kill his brother in the first century to now motivate people. Love, greed, hate, anger, whatever. These are the things that motivate people. Write about life and make your characters about as real as you possibly can.
I think that's excellent counsel. And as you have joined our group of many authors who've been kind enough to be on our show, I would like to invite you to pull the pineapple and add your books to our collection.
How about a couple of copies of these?
Excellent. Thank you. We'll make sure you're not attacked by the rest of the books.
There. Just, you say pull the pineapple.
Yep, literally, you get to pull half a pineapple when you're doing that. It became an accidental tradition, and we've been carrying it through on all the shows. And Major, I would very much like to thank you for joining us today. You've really shared a lot of great insights with our audience, and I'd like to thank our audience for being with us today. As I've shared with you, Major is a very prolific writer. He is also a speaker, and he runs his own publishing company. If you'd like to learn more about him and his books, please visit the KAZV TV website. And meanwhile, thank you very much for being on the Central Valley Writers Workshop. We look forward to seeing you on our next show. Have a wonderful day.